Therefore, dear brothers and sisters, you have no obligation to do what your sinful nature urges you to do. For if you live by its dictates, you will die. But if through the power of the Spirit you put to death the deeds of your sinful nature, you will live. For all who are led by the Spirit of God are children of God. So you have not received a spirit that makes you fearful slaves. Instead, you received God's Spirit when he adopted you as his own children. Now we call him Abba, Father. For his Spirit joins with our spirit to affirm that we are God's children. And since we are his children, we are his heirs. In fact, together with Christ, we are heirs of God's glory. But if we are to share his glory, we must also share his suffering. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
You may have heard a story of the loving father. There was a man who had two sons, and the younger son told his father, "I want my share of your estate now, before you die." So his father agreed to divide his wealth between his sons. A few days later, this younger son packed up all his belongings and moved to a distant land, and there he wasted his money in wild living. About the time his money ran out, a great famine spread over the land, and he began to starve. He persuaded a local farmer to hire him, and the man sent him into the fields to feed the pigs. The young man became so hungry that even the pods he was feeding the pigs looked good to him, but no one gave him anything. When he finally came to his senses, he said to himself, "At home, even the hired servants have food enough to spare, and here I am dying of hunger. I will go home to my father and say, 'Father, I have sinned before heaven and you, and I am no longer worthy of being called your son. Please take me on as a hired servant.' So he returned home to his father, and while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. His son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and no longer worthy to be called your son.' But his father said to the servants, 'Quick, bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. Get the ring for his finger and the sandals for his feet, and kill the calf we have been fattening. We must celebrate with a feast, for this son of mine was dead and now has returned to life. He was lost, but now he is found.' So the party began." Now I can tell you that story, but it makes a difference that Jesus told that story. And quite often the sort of idea of Jesus being part of that story is one that sort of intrigued people. And I'm indebted to Tom Smale, who was my doctrine lecturer at St John's, Nottingham, in his book, The Forgotten Father, still a lovely book. He talks about the importance of Jesus having told that story. And he says, the story's different because it's spoken by the Son who's on the way to the cross. It's different because Jesus comes down to our depths. He has a strong relationship with his Father, and on the cross, of course, he experienced the Son forsaken by the Father. As Archbishop Stephen Cottrell puts it, God is forsaken by God. The Son loses his sonship and faith, and Father his fatherhood. The Son loses his sonship, and the Father his fatherhood. So Father is involved in the pain of separation. Jesus is with us when we experience our desolation, our defeat, our abandonment, our feeling that there's no one that can help. But of course, Jesus is risen. Jesus is risen, now ascended and glorified. So that makes a difference. But the experience that Jesus had colours how we can accept the Father. That story is often called the prodigal son. It should be called the loving Father, because that's the point of it. The Father stands by the road and waits for the Son. He wants him to come home. And you didn't run in those days because you had your rope. If you showed your legs, that wasn't thought good. So the fact that he ran makes it all different. Do you like being at home? Yeah? I like being at home. I used to remember when I went on holiday, I used to about halfway through the week, we went away for a week every year, same week, I used to say, can we go home now? Mother used to say, yeah, we're going back to the hotel. No, I don't mean that, I mean the real home. Can we go back to real home now? She said, no, well, we're here a few more days. I said, oh, well, okay then, but we want to go back to real home. Because home is important, isn't it? My worst story of not being at home was when we had a choir camp. I don't know how old I was, maybe 12, something like that. And we had this choir camp that we all went on because we were in choir, church choir. And about partway through the week, I really didn't like it. I don't like camping. I still don't like tents. This is why I don't like tents. I didn't like it at all. It was cold and it was wet and all this. And I said, I want to go home. And the person running the camp said, well, we talked about it. And he said, well, okay, that's fine. Now, I don't remember how my father knew to come and get me, because we didn't have a phone. So all I can suppose is that I left the number of the neighbour, and the neighbour had gone to talk to my father, and somehow the church leader had contacted him. But I don't know how they did that. But I do remember the fact that it was one day and he said, well, at 12 o'clock, I want you to walk down to the end of the lane and your father will be there. He didn't come with me. I was sent to walk down this lane and I didn't know whether my father would be there. But he was. Sitting in the car waiting for me. But I remember walking down there and thinking, well, will he be there? How will I know he's there? It's a weird feeling, but he was. Yeah. And in the same way, God the Father is always there, waiting. I stand by the road, and I stand by the road for you again. Someone wrote a song, it was me who wrote a song with that title. But it's getting hold of that fact. And this book, Tom Smell, Forgotten Father, we forget the loving Father that we have in God. And we mustn't, because he waits for us. But we've got to make that decision to get in touch with him. And it's easy, we just say, Father, this is what I'm feeling. Father, this is how I am. And God responds. Father responds, and he's there waiting for us. And he's there waiting with all the good things that we can have. And he wants the best for us. It's like the father in the story. He says, right, get the fatted calf, get the robe, get the ring, get the sandals. We'll talk about that in a minute. But he wants the best for the son. One of my clergy colleagues once told me a story that when he was a salesman, and he was staying in Scotland and met in the hotel with this rival company who were selling a similar product, you see. So they're chatting away at the bar. And previously in the day, he was inquiring of the barman, did they have any of those really expensive whiskies, £3,000 a bottle sort of stuff. And he says, yeah, we've got one up there. He said, well, how much is a glass of it? He says, well, it's about 150 quid, something like that. So anyway, they're in the bar later at the night with these other company, and the company say to him, oh, look, we'll get you a drink. What would you like? So my colleague looks at the barman, nods, and out comes the really posh whiskey. So next day, the other company come to get their bill, and they say, oh, we must have had a time at the bar last night. Look at the expenses on our bill. And they never knew the best because the price was being paid by someone else. This stuff writes itself, doesn't it? Jesus has won the fact that we can call God Abba, Father. And as the Old Testament lecturer at St. John says, he's on the beach in Israel and kids were going, Abba, can I have an ice cream? Abba, can you build me a sandcastle? That's our Father. Yeah? So I wonder what it is you want to bring today. Maybe you, like the son in the story, been putting it off. And you have to wait till things have got to that sort of low point where you have to say, I need help. I need someone to step in. I need someone to listen to me. And sometimes just having someone to listen to is the thing, and that sort of somehow releases it. It's funny the things you remember. I was talking to a little Christian group that I go to, and we were talking about coming to God. And going through my head was the image of, in the film Crocodile Dundee, it might have been Dundee 1, it might have been Dundee 2, don't quite remember. But he says, I think is when he's in America and everybody seems to be going to sort of people, to psychiatrists and having counselling and stuff. And he says, we don't have that in Australia, he says, we just tell Jim the barman and Jim tells everybody else and everything's all right. And there's something, isn't there, about telling someone else. Well, there'll be an opportunity later to come up and say to someone, look, this is it. This is the thing that's been getting me. I realise now I've got to bring it to Father. Yeah? That might be you. Might be you. If it's not, you can pray for other people for whom it is true. But the loving Father is there. There's a technique of Christian counselling called sozo. Has anyone come across that? Yeah. Okay. And in that, they're very fond of this thing called the father ladder. And if you go and have some of the counselling, they're partway through it, they go, father ladder. And what they're saying is you see that sometimes how we experienced Father for us, or the person that acted like your father, it might not have been your real father, but somebody who was a father figure to you, and you'll think God the Father is a bit like them. So when I think my dad was at the end of the road, then I'm thinking Father's always there, see? But if your dad wasn't always there, I mean, my dad was there in one sense, but he was very remote in another sense, so there was a downside to it. But when it mattered, he was there. And so how you relate to your father might affect how you relate to God the Father. Yeah. You can think about that yourself some other time. But what we've got to get right is the fact that we have this loving Father who won't neglect us, who's always there for us. And it must have been lovely for Jesus when they heard the voice, "This is my Son in whom I am well pleased." Imagine that, you hear this voice saying, "Hey, Son, you've done well. You've done well. You've all done very well." Right? Because you're accepted. You're accepted, and you're accepted, each one of you, as a child of God. I chose that reading because it said daughters and sons, and it was more embracing. But we're all children of God. But the Son, why is that important? Because the Son had the rights of inheritance. And that's what you've got as well. You're heirs, all right? And so when the Son comes back, he says, right, get the best robe. And the robe was a symbol that he was the Son, right? And then he has the ring, and that was a symbol of authority, yeah? And he's got the sandals. Now, a free man, not a slave, a free man could wear his shoes indoors. You probably get told off for wearing your shoes indoors, all right? But that was the thing, because you even inside, in the house, in the home, it showed who you were. It showed that you were accepted because you had your shoes on. So we are robed in righteousness. You have a robe of righteousness? Yeah. Rings? Oh, not sure about rings, but I suppose that you may have a special ring. You may have a wedding ring. You may have another ring which you treasure. My dad lost it. He had this ring. It wasn't a wedding ring, but he'd had it for years, and he always wore it. And then one day he says, "I lost my ring." We said, "Oh, where did you?" He says, "I don't know, and it must maybe in the garden somewhere or something." And it come off. And then years later, he found it under the gooseberry bush. Gooseberry bush, yes. And he was doing some digging, and he said, "Hey, this is his ring, my ring." And he found it. He was so pleased that he came in and said, "Oh, a ring, got a ring." That son, to get that ring back, must have been so pleased. So are you pleased that you're a child of God? Yeah. Because it means a lot to be a child of God. It means a lot to be loved by God and know the love of the Father. So sometimes we try and sort of retain that sort of character of the children of God. And that's what that passage from Romans was about, really. Look, you're children of God. You should be behaving like this. But sometimes it's difficult, isn't it, to change our behaviour. I like the story, I keep telling it, I don't think I've said it here, of the person that gets, they retire. Oh, sorry, you had your retirement course, how to retire well. And they retire, and they think they like to get a little job locally, just to really meet people and maybe get a little bit of money. And so they get a job in one of the supermarkets, I think it was Tesco. And they're in Tesco, and the person says to them, they've been there a few days, and the manager says to them, look, we've noted that you always seem to be arriving late. What would they have said in your previous job if you'd arrived late? He says, I don't know, maybe, morning, Admiral, would you like a cup of tea? And you can see that the stark sort of contrast, that this person had been an admiral obviously for years and then comes into this sort of supermarket thing, and to change character was not easy. That's a positive character, isn't it, really? I don't know. But sometimes it is, isn't it, difficult to change from something you've been doing for a long while and you've got used to that. And it's the son in our story, you know, he'd got used to being in the different country, but he'd spent all his money on wild living, and then he's in this situation of being with the pigs. Now, he's Jewish. He's looking after pigs, all right? I get that bit. And what he's giving the pigs looks better than the food he's getting, if he's getting any food. But to change, no, I left father, I left home, is that conflict? Shall I come back? Shall I not come back? And sometimes we can be in that conflict with God. Yeah. Every year I used to, when I was younger, play the organ for a friend of mine who was a clergyman, retired up into Oxfordshire, little parish up there. And I knew all his sermons because he's the same ones. He had a sort of drawer full of postcards in the days when you didn't have digital filing. Move away from, no, we won't go there, it's political. Digital filing. He had a box, he had a drawer full of postcards. And he used to say, oh, what Sunday is it? Say, oh, it used to be Trinity something or Septuagesima or something like that. They all had weird names in the old days. And he'd get out a postcard, he'd read it through and sort of think, oh, well, I'll just change that illustration there and that there. And then he'd read it out again. So there's a little guy, I don't remember any of the sermons that he did. The only one I do remember is one about the origin of the word sincere. Right. Because sincere came from the Roman Latin sina siera, without wax. Because they'd made a statue, and if you made a mess of it, you'd fill in the bit that was dodgy with a bit of wax. So without wax became sincere, because you didn't have any dodgy bits that needed filling in. So maybe that's what God's looking for. Maybe that's what the writer to Romans is trying to get at. We need to be sincere with God. We need to be genuine with God and not sort of try and cover up the bits that are a little bit dodgy. All right? Now, it doesn't matter that we've got bits that are a little bit dodgy. That's not the point. The point is that God is there, ready to accept us as we are. Now, Tom Smale in his book does this lovely bit. He says, well, imagine for a minute if the son had come back and it wasn't the father that he met first, but it was the brother. Maybe it might have gone something like this, Tom says. The son came home and met first his elder brother. Is he speaking to me? He said anxiously. Well, he's still very upset, but if you like, I will go and put in a word for you and see if it will help. After a while, he returned and said, the news is not good. He's not really got over what you've done to him. But I pleaded for you, and for my sake, he is prepared to let you come back on certain conditions, and provided that you cause no more trouble. He won't receive you himself, and all relationships between you and him will be conducted through me. Sometimes we distort our Christian faith to be like that and forget that we have a loving Father. Maybe Jesus was telling the story just to emphasize the loving Father that he knew, the loving Father that he wanted you to know, the loving Father who is still there for us. When you get home, you can Google Rembrandt's picture of the prodigal son, right? And see what you notice. It's not quite obvious at first, but if you look carefully, you'll see that the father's hands are different sizes. One is a very masculine hand, and the other is a very feminine hand. Maybe Rembrandt was trying to say, well, God is strong and powerful, yes, but he's also loving and caring, yes. So have a look when you get home. You can Google that and see the picture. There's many. He did lots of sketches about it. He was quite, not obsessed, the wrong word, but he loved the story and did lots of drawings and paintings on that theme. But here we are, all dressed up in our robes of righteousness, shoes of the gospel of peace, and rings of assurance. And we're ready again to meet with Father. So you can be thinking about what you want to say, really. Maybe there's something that you've been dealing with for a while. a lot of the things that we were praying before the service, I won't repeat all the things now, but a lot of them would tie in with this. I knew that when you were saying them. I always like to listen and just see what people come up with and think, oh, we're on the right theme. Oh, we seem to be. That's good to know. But perhaps overall, the thought was there's nothing too deep, there's nothing too sad, there's nothing too painful for God to reach. And there seemed to be this theme of coming into a light acceptance, a love of God. Maybe you could call that a coming home. When we get to our home in heaven, maybe that's what it feels like, truly to come home. But in the meantime, meet with Father. Don't forget he loves you, and enjoy the meeting.